Con Stathopoulos and Josh Phegan come together in an incredible podcast, Grow, Scale, Master.
An energetic approach to drive progress, master skills, build strengths and put the strategy back into rapid business and personal success.
Backed by real-world experience in rapid scaling to playing the long-term game of business, it's the story of all the lessons learned on the journey to mastery.
Be inspired, renew your energy and chase the future with Grow, Scale, Master.
Building wealth is a really interesting conversation because, Con, we're probably not even allowed to talk about it unless you are a financial advisor. So please seek your own financial advice.
Terms and conditions apply.
From your own financial advisor. But let's have a great conversation because, what actually is wealth?
Oh, well, mate, it can be financial wealth. It can be personal wealth in terms of your mental health. It can be physical wealth. I think you've got to define what success looks like to you when you're talking about wealth. Yes, it can be assets, it can be cash at bank, it can be investments and whatnot. But I also look at it as what value you're putting on your physical and mental wealth that should actually match your bank account too.
What's the age-old saying is that health is wealth?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And you start thinking about health of mind, health of relationships, health of financials,
Absolutely.
Health about what's happening inside of a business. But wealth is that you've actually got some in reservoir that you can go to.
Correct.
When you need it.
That's exactly right.
And that you're building for a bigger future in whatever way that looks like. In terms of quality of relationship, you've got excess.
Where you've made enough deposits so you can make withdrawals, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can't have a Big Mac every single day. I mean, you can if you want to, if that's your strategy. But, when you want to be able to have that Big Mac, I've put enough, deposits in, which I don't eat, by the way, which you've put enough deposits in terms of exercise and everything else that you've been eating. So you can make a withdrawal. So I think wealth is really important. And I think it's a topic that we don't talk about enough in real estate.
Yeah, the interesting thing about it is that as a real estate agent, we can't give financial advice.
No.
But yet financial advisors don't give advice about property because they're not paid for it.
Correct. I know, it's crazy, right?
So hang on a second. So you're licensed, but you don't offer the product because you don't get remunerated or paid for or a commission because of that. So there's a big issue around that. Now, we see a lot of people, and particularly this is a very topical conversation today because of the cost of living crisis that's hit and a generation that feel that, hey, they're not going to get into the property market. And what we're about to see is one of the biggest generational transfers of wealth.
Yes.
That as the baby boomers get closer to the sunset than the sunrise, that those assets will then start to pass to future generations, which will allow people to do other things with it.
Bernard Salt, the demographer, I saw him speak at the Macquarie Perspective event. He said, from this year to 2056, the family wealth that's going to be transferred is $2.2 billion a month in property. Just think about that, Australia-wide, for the next 30 years. So what are you going to do with that? And I think the thing that we don't do as an industry well enough, and I think I think as society as well. I mean, I never got taught about tax at school. I never got taught about GST input credits and
cash.
Yeah, it's cash, right? It was all cash, right? But you see agents. I see a lot of agents that get a lot of success very quickly, and they are not structured financially to be able to handle that. And what I mean by that is, it's not about that they go and spend the money. It's they're spending other people's money. I wrote $1 million, so I've got $1 million lifestyle. Well, the reality is you've split that. Then you've got a thing called tax. Then you've got things called superannuation expenses, etc. So what is your net profit that is left over? And I think if we don't, as an industry, start educating people better about what the implications of not paying your tax are and et cetera, or paying superannuation to your staff or yourself, then what ends up happening is your mental and your physical wealth diminishes because you can't actually deal with the financial part of it.
So how's this, Con? If your mum and dad, from when you were born, opened up an investment account and they used the right style of vehicle to do that, so it's high growth.
Yep.
And they said, okay, great, we're going to put $25 away a week for little Con.
Yep.
20 years down the track, the calculators tell us that $25 a week would equal $59,340.
It's life-changing.
So if you're on your 21st birthday,
$60,000.
mum and dad said, hey, Con, here's 60 grand. In the modern economy, that might be paying your HECS, that might be a deposit on a small apartment, it might be the paying out and buying a car, it might be, getting you into your first house. But that's like the conversation of what we're having. So rather than all the extra toys, or the extra things that you might have got at your birthday or Christmas, or that people come and give to your kids,
the double ups,
what would actually happen if they just put that amount aside? And it's an interesting conversation. So we're having a conversation today about wealth, because how do you build it?
One step at a time.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that you've got to start thinking that. Let's have a quick look at it. There's what we've got to call income.
Yes,
and income comes by me working. It can come by me having money in the bank when I get interest. Mm-hmm. It can come by me owning a portion of a business, usually on the Australian Stock Exchange, better known as a dividend. Mm-hmm. Maybe I own a mine and I get a royalty. Bit weird.
Yep.
Or maybe I've written a song and every single time Beyonce sings it, I make cash.
That'd be nice.
Yeah. But all I want for Christmas,
Mariah Carey, like $100 million or something,
yeah,
right?
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So you start thinking about that, but it's actually how you build it is you got to start to say, okay, great, what percentage of my income comes by working? What percentage comes by these other sources? And now what am I going to do to make sure that I don't just spend everything that I earn? Mm-hmm. So what we have learned is that whatever comes in, normally, if that goes up, people spend more.
Yes.
So it's called lifestyle creep. And the interesting conversation is that there's an old school saying of pay yourself first. Mm-hmm. The richest man in Babylon. The richest man in Babylon says that 10% of all of your wages should go into a savings account that is never touched.
Yes.
And it's called a peace of mind account.
Yeah.
So that way, if anything really goes sideways, you've always got funds to go and do it.
I have a friend, Josh, that calls it the holy shit account.
Yeah, okay, great.
So,
same thing.
If the shit hits the fan, I've got enough money to be able to get me out of this.
And so there's an old school thing called the eighth wonder of the world, compound interest.
Yeah.
And the whole idea here is that it actually comes from the foundational belief of something called the rule of 72. Now, what the rule of 72 is it says whatever the amount of return that you're getting, if you take 72 and you divide it by that number, the outcome is the number of years it will take your money to double.
So can you give me an example?
So let's say, for example, that you are getting a 10% return.
Yep.
And you take 72 and you divide it by 10.
Yep.
That means it will take 7.2 years for that value of that asset to double.
Excellent. Love that.
Okay, so if you are in residential real estate and you're in Sydney right now, and we're not, but let's assume that we were at, 5% return on owning an asset, then you would act just in capital growth. The interesting conversation is that asset will double, of course, every 14 years.
Yeah.
And so that's the whole idea about understanding, what actually you're doing is about getting the rates up. So from my whole conversation to people is about, one of the secrets here is that you've got to make a decision about how you're going to make money. And when I go to look at wealth, one of the greatest wealth events that I've seen is people that buy property, own it for a period of time, do some form of improvement to that property. Mm-hmm. Might be a subdivision. It might be as simple as renovating a kitchen. It might be repainting it. It might be just holding on to it over a period of time and then naturally selling that. And particularly in Australia on your principal place of residence, you don't have to pay any tax on the sale of that.
Correct.
Whereas if you've got an investment property, there'll be a capital gains tax amount that will come on.
Yes.
But learning that literally, my dad would always say that you got to have a couple of tickets in the lotto. Mm-hmm. And he didn't actually mean the lotto, so to speak. But what he means is that if you owned a few properties, then that would actually make a lot of things change. So this is the movement of the measurement of your metrics in wealth creation from just revenue that I'm producing, aka I'm $1 million writer GCI, to profit that I'm actually taking home. Mm-hmm. So by the time I pay for my operations person, my salesperson, the brand fee, all of those other things that go on, what I'm actually left with.
Yeah.
And then how do I take those profits once I've paid my taxation and actually then start to apply it into asset growth? So delayed gratification of rather than buying the, really expensive car, can I have a nice car, but actually then put my money into making sure that I'm actually, building up some sort of asset base? And a lot of people say, hey, I can't do that because the barriers to entry are too high to go and buy a house for $1 million.
Sure.
Okay, great. But the barrier to entry to go and buy some sort of like ETF, which is like a balanced scorecard across the entire ASX or international shares or technology shares, is not that high. So when you go and have a quick look at it, we've been looking a lot at this Vanguard thing recently, and the whole idea about what they're saying is that, okay, great, very low cost of management to get you in.
Yes.
But naturally, you can put $100 away, you can put $200 away.
$1,000.
CommSec have actually done one too, which is like a little app called Pocket, and you can invest as little as $2 each time.
Yeah.
And the interesting conversation is that what we're trying to do is that that's the discipline of $50 a week turns into $2.5 grand. You take that up to $100, that's going to be $5,000 a year. You start thinking about the modification of that, get it to 200, get it to 300. You start doing it as you start to grow. The thing is that by really doing good quality, powerful investment and not having to go too crazy on it, you can actually start to have those shares build throughout your uni degree. So then by the time you finish your uni degree in 3 or 4 years' time,
you can pay off your HECS debt.
Yep, and or you've got cash to actually be able to go and leverage yourself into going and buying a property or a better quality share portfolio that can then grow in terms of capital growth. And over time, that then allows you into a position that then you can actually have enough money to then get into a property, and then from property, then that can continue to grow and you'll grow equity, and equity then allows you to buy more investments and the whole thing starts. But the problem is that we look at people that are 50 and 60 and we think, we would never get there. And then also too, the other conversation is that sometimes you meet people that are at 50 and 60 that didn't do any of those things and are still in a position that they have to work because they didn't put any aside. And respectfully, they if you ask them, they probably don't really think they even lived a great life on the way through because they just earn enough to get by.
It's called paycheck to paycheck, right?
Yeah.
I think you've nailed a couple of things there. The difference between revenue and profit, the ability to be able to utilize cash flow in a more positive way. So earning an income isn't wealth. It's using that income to generate wealth. And, there's that old saying, when's the best time to plant a tree?
Yeah.
Well, today.
Yeah.
Right. So you can get started today. And the beauty about that is if you get some really good advice, and usually that advice is literally sitting under, I call this a mental board of directors. So who's going to keep you healthy? Who's going to keep you safe? Who's going to keep you secure? Who's going to, help you out with a legal document or whatever? So you might have a lawyer, you might have a financial planner, an accountant, etc. But sometimes mum and dad are the best people that might give you the best advice, and sometimes mum and dad are the worst people to give you that best advice. So I kind of look at this and I go, we are all responsible for our own journeys in life, and it's our responsibility to be able to accrue enough to be able to live and to be able to pay back tax and to be able to provide for our families and then to also create wealth.
Yeah, one of the interesting things, and you'll make your own decisions on what works in your own circumstances, but I said, okay, great. I'm going to set up a couple of different savings accounts. So I'm going to actually have a tax savings account.
Yep.
I'm going to have a holiday savings account. I'm going to have a future asset purchasing savings account, and then I'm going to have a splurge account.
Yeah.
And then what I then say, okay, great. I'm now going to make sure that I've got a minimum amount of money that I'm going to have in my savings account at call at all times. So I said, okay, great. I'm going to set it at 10 grand. And then every week, money's going to come in, wages are going to come in, commissions might come in. And then all of a sudden, I've got to pay out everything on Friday night, or credit card bills, or gas or electricity or mobile phone bills. And then whatever is left over that 10 grand, that automatically goes and is applied against the mortgage.
Fantastic.
So then I have an automatic deduction that each week a certain amount goes into the tax account, a certain amount goes into the holiday account. You get the idea of the splurge account.
Yep.
And then literally, because what I'd find if I had a spare $5,000, I'll straight down to the mountain bike shop.
Yeah, buying a new bike. Yeah.
And so then I thought, okay, great. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get really, really clear on what that financial success looks like. And it's the smallest disciplines that lead to the greatest levels of success. And over time, what actually happened is that then all of a sudden those savings accounts became really good. And I didn't realize that all of a sudden my income was starting to ramp up as I became more successful in the sales environment, but I was still living to the $10,000 a week in the savings account scenario as my baseline.
Yeah.
And so these chunky commissions would start hitting, but I didn't see it because a certain amount was going to the tax and a certain amount was going to the savings account and a certain amount was going down, paying down the mortgage. And the benefit was that literally buying that first house, that literally then gave you the equity, then go and buy the second, and that then gave you the equity, then go and buy the third, and that third asset was the one that had the significant, price growth, and those things are a really important part. But it is an important conversation for the longer term view, and they say that what great generations do is that they plant a tree for the next generation.
Yes, correct.
Which is where we're talking about the savings account for the kids and some of those things. But understanding that if you have a look at the greatest wealth events, it's probably when you started a business and grew it from zero to hero, or you bought a property and you owned it for a period of time to allow that capital growth. And what I'm trying to get you to think about is that no one ever thinks about this, but when you go and talk to an insurance advisor around trauma insurance, life protection insurance, key person risk insurance, and that you've got to go and get all of those things in play so that if something happened, that naturally you're in a position that you would be okay. It was kind of interesting because when I did mine, many years ago, the guy said to me, and when we still want you living in Balmain, I'm like, man, if I can't like go anywhere and I'm in a wheelchair or something, man, I'm not living in Balmain, bro. Take me back to Albury, I'll be sweet. And the interesting conversation is that it's really important. How much time do you spend on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, or an annual basis about actually just having time with the right advisors about building your personal wealth?
Yeah, I think it's critically important. It should form the basis of what you might do. For example, I mean, every year I go to an executive health clinic and I spend a whole day there and do every single test under the sun to be able to make sure, because I have key person insurance in our business and that's a requirement of it. But it's also a requirement of my mental health to make sure that, if anything's popping up, then I can address it. It's the same thing. If you let the weeds grow in your bank account, you'll end up with an ATO bill. You'll end up having to wind up your company. You'll end up with a legal suit against you because you haven't paid superannuation to a former employee. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, you think you earn more money than what you've actually got. And so when you go and splurge it on a watch or a car or a holiday, realistically, you're actually going into debit. You're not going into credit.
And the number of people with negative equity in a car loan, so in other words, where they owe more than what the car is worth, is insane.
Absolutely.
So the lesson here is that, what we're getting across today, spend some time about actually understanding what you're trying to build in terms of wealth. Get the right advisors around you for your own circumstances. But what I can tell you without a doubt, some of those old school adages like put 10% of what you earn into a savings account, make sure that you're in a position that you live below your means, realize that some of the happiest people in the world are those that are really happy with what they've already got.
Yes.
That can make a massive difference.
Absolutely agree. Experiences that rapidly shaped you.
Con, one of the things that I remember, and like when you get a scent and you smell it and it just brings back memories, is the smell of vinegar.
Right.
And I know this sounds crazy. No, like real vinegar.
Oh, real vinegar, right.
And this happened as a young child because what my dad did is he used to go and buy a block of flats. Right. And he'd buy a block of flats.
Gotcha.
And there was cigarette smells in the flat.
Gotcha.
And the way to get that out is that he would go and put out these bowls of vinegar and leave that in the flat over the course to cement for a week. And that'd get rid of the smell of all the smoke and all the cigarette smell, right?
There you go.
And it was like, but then what would happen is that Dad would rip out the carpets and he would change over the kitchen benches and he would repaint them. And he used to do this thing called strata titling. So he'd then strata title them and then put a firewall in the roof, and then my dad would then go on and then he would like sometimes throw gravel over the concrete because it wasn't good enough. Other times he'd actually rip up the concrete and repaint it and he'd do different things to that particular unit block. He would potentially either release it or he would move into a position. He'd change the tenancy mix or he'd offer it as vacant possession. And then Dad would go and on-sell those particular things. And every year, he would make like 30, 40, 50, 80, 100 grand on every single block of flats that he did. And he used to call it a trick. I'm like, so what are you doing? And he goes, well, like, literally I earn my money by selling real estate and running the real estate practice. But every year for a little bit extra, we do a trick.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting thing because it was about his form of investment and growing net wealth was always about doing a trick. And so I started to get you to think about that. Is that like literally what are the things that you're doing at the moment that you're investing in? It might be in your business. It might be about doing something to grow an additional person. It might be buying a property to renovate if that's a natural skill set that you've got, or investing in something, but making sure that you're doing something to help you to grow net wealth outside of just the day-to-day. And it was an interesting thing because it naturally fitted into Dad's disciplines. He was a builder by trade and then a real estate agent. And so he could go and sell them and save on the commish. You get the idea of going doing those things. Yeah. You've got this whole different view of a developer that you'd met that gave you good insight.
Yeah, very successful developer and has become a very close friend. And I asked him about his investment strategy. And this particular gentleman owns hundreds of units across Sydney. And he said his philosophy around particularly property, but I use this for a life analogy too, Josh, was just let the grass grow. So, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, more often than not, we're too quick to, buy a development site, knock down the existing dwelling that was already producing an income, go and get a DA from council. We've got all those holding costs with them. We've got all the requirements from a building commissioner. We start building, then construction finance goes up, and then what we end up looking at is, a negative net position. Because the best success I've ever had is by just letting the grass grow. And then what's happened is FSRs have changed or site requirements have changed. Now, he's relating this just purely to property, But I love that as an analogy in life. Let the grass grow, be patient, have a plan, have a focus, and when the opportunity strikes, strike.
Something that's changing your view.
Con, I really love the idea of the power of $1 saved and the power of that dollar then applied today. And, this is that interesting thing that you don't have any regrets, but you go, geez, I wish I had known about that earlier. And, saying, okay, great, the discipline to say you actually can get involved and you can buy really good quality assets, whether or not that just be shares and later on into the property and then later on doing property development. But you've got to make that decision to say, okay, great, don't spend everything. And when I have a look at different generations and I talk to them, hey, what's your thoughts about money and how does it work and what does it look like and how does Afterpay impact you and those types of products that are available in marketplace, they're like, well, I can't buy a house, so I'm just going to spend it. And I think that Bernard Salt got done for the old avocado and toast conversation, right?
Yeah, that went viral.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that, we are of the belief, well, I'm powerless. But you know what? You're going to continue to be even more powerless, if that's even possible, because you're not making the decisions to put some money aside or to do some good things for your future self. And you feel that what you're doing is inconsequential, aka $100 a week or $200 a week, but yet the impact on what it has over the long term is really phenomenally life-changing.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, it's discipline. Secondly, it's a plan. And the third one is, you've heard that saying as well, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So I think that delayed gratification or the instant gratification that we actually need, by delaying that and actually having a really simple plan that you can execute really well, that $100 may not seem like anything today, but if you compound that over the next 5, 10 or 15 years, it's life-changing.